Now, I have the absolute honor of introducing to you Senator Tim Kaine. As someone who has been a fair housing lawyer, mayor, governor, and senator, Senator Kaine has a much deeper understanding of fair housing than most and brings unique knowledge and expertise to the fight for fair housing on Capitol Hill. We are so grateful to him for joining us tonight, and if you would, please join me in welcoming Senator Tim Kaine.
Hey, thank you, Susan. Thank you. So nice. Hey, good evening. Thank you. Well, thank you. It is a treat to be here. I've brought Russell Wade from my office, who does housing policy with me, and this is a great, great event. And I would have been here if I wasn't speaking, because the panel is going to be really cool. That's what I'm looking forward to. And being with you, I've got a lot of friends in this room. It's hard to imagine that it's the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act. And if you think about 1968, what a year of tragedy and challenge. I was 10 years old, and I was a big newspaper reader growing up in Kansas City. And it just seemed like every morning the paper that would land on our doorstep would have one tragedy after the next. Vietnam, the assassination of Martin Luther King, the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, the disruption and turmoil surrounding the Democratic Convention in Chicago, the election of the first president that was forced to resign under threat of impeachment. That was 1968, 50 years ago, a year of tragedy and challenge. But it was also a year of the passage of the Fair Housing Act, something that's lasted, something that has grown, something that has been improved with time, something that's made a difference all across the country. And I think there's a lesson there. In times of tragedy, in times of challenge, good can still happen. And that's a lesson that's not just one about 50 years ago, it's one about today, and it's one about tomorrow. We're standing here at the end of that first 50 years of the Fair Housing Act, and in this museum, I think it's important to acknowledge what that 50 years means. We're about in 2019, next year, to commemorate the 400th anniversary of the arrival of African Americans into the English colonies. Slaves brought ashore at Point Comfort, Virginia, now Hampton, Virginia, in 1619. And if you think about the challenge that our minority communities, and in particular the African American community, has faced, think about that 400 years divided into 8 half-centuries. 5 of the 8 half-centuries, Africans were enslaved. And even those who were free, even those who were children of freed Africans, by the Dred Scott ruling, were determined that they could never be citizens. 5/8 of our history, 5/8 of those half-centuries. For 2/8, African Americans were no longer enabled to be slaved, but they were held in a subjugated legal status, where they were legally able to be treated as second-class citizens. And it was only with the legal statutes of the 60s, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and the Fair Housing Act, that we began the last of our 8 half-centuries, and African Americans were legally equal, de jure equal, but not de facto equal. And so the 50 years of the Fair Housing Act is a kind of a marker of the 1/8 of our history where African Americans at least have been able to be treated in an equal way, in a de jure fashion. The Fair Housing Act has affected my life very significantly. I went to Richmond in 1984 after clerking for a federal judge to practice law, and with a 12-person firm, somebody came in who needed help. And you know what happens when somebody who needs help comes in and can't pay? Who's the newest lawyer here? Who's the person who just passed the bar exam? And this client was sent to me, and I heard her story, and she was almost exactly my age, coming to a new city like I was, starting a new job like I was, looking for her first apartment away from being a student like I recently had. But her experience was so very different from mine. While mine was an experience of opportunity and opening up a new chapter in my life, hers was an experience of getting turned away because of the color of her skin. I represented her in federal court, and that then began an 18-year legal practice where this was mostly what I did. And just quickly, my clients were turned away from apartments due to race, disability, and children, multiple clients. They were fired from jobs after complaining about practices of their bosses turning down applicants because of their race. They were refused applications to rent mobile homes because they had kids. They were blocked by neighborhood associations and a local zoning department from opening group homes for mentally retarded adults based on the assertion of an illegal restrictive covenant. They had a sales contract canceled after neighbors and a real estate firm and a local bank conspired to purchase a home in their neighborhood away from them so that they couldn't move in because of the color of their skin. They were chased by a driver aggressively brandishing a firearm after they attended an open house next door to the neighbor's property. They were denied homeowners insurance due to the racial composition of their neighborhood. And they were discouraged from renting in apartment communities due to advertising materials that had been explicitly designed to only include white people and to eliminate anybody of color so as to be less attractive to people who are diverse in renting communities. I learned a lot from my clients over the 18 years, and I try to bring those lessons to my work today. But of course, we're here to talk about the 50 years, but really what comes in the future. Faulkner said the history is the effort to create a usable past. If it's just about the past, who cares? Let's try to create a usable past, something that we can learn something and something that we can grow with. And the challenges of fair housing today are broadening and broadening, whether it's the rights of folks with disabilities, or the rights of people who speak different languages or come from different countries, or equal treatment of people based on the kind of income they present, whether it's a paycheck or a Social Security disability check, or so many other issues. The affirmative advance of fair housing, working with local governments and others. There's so many challenges that are on the table that require us to not only redouble, but re-triple and quadruple our efforts going forward. You in the room are the representatives of organizations, agencies, local governments that will enforce this, that will enable the promise of April 1968 to be more perfect, to be closer and closer to what it was meant to be when it was passed. And I thank you for the work, and I thank you for your commitment to carry it forward. It's great to be with you tonight. I appreciate it.